Hi, everybody. My name is Todd Nash, president of the Oregon Cattlemen's Association. I'm here today with president-elect of the Oregon Cattlemen's Association and also the Public Lands Committee chair. And Matt, you want to further introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Todd. Yep. Matt McElligott, reside North Powder, a ranch in Baker County and Grant County, have a Forest Service permit in Grant County. As Todd said, president-elect for OCA, and we're here today to talk about some public lands issues.
Yeah, so Matt, first of all, you want to talk a little bit about just what PLC is, both statewide and nationally, and what kind of work you guys do?
Sure. So the Public Land Council works in conjunction with affiliated states, and there's 11 Western affiliate states that are members of the Public Lands Council. Oregon is one. And here locally through OCA, we have a Public Lands Committee, and that committee is made up of public lands ranchers. And we actually do a dues assessment because the Public Lands Council in Washington, D.C. collects the dues per AUM from each state. So we do the same thing statewide, and annually we send out a notification of, a dues collection, which is totally voluntary. And it helps us be members of the Public Lands Council, which gives us access to the staff in Washington, D.C., who does lobbying for us nationally. And then we work here in the state on state issues through OCA with the state legislature and local counties and county commissioners like yourself, Todd, when we have public lands issues in certain areas throughout the state.
Yeah. And you had just a little bit of a victory. We talked about it on the board meeting this morning in Central Oregon with some of the mule deer assessments that were being proposed there in Deschutes County. So
yeah, we've had a couple good, you could call them victories kind of in our court. Was one with the mule deer corridor in Central Oregon. But then also another Central Oregon issue was the Lemon Gulch bike trails, where the Forest Service had originally proposed 52 miles of bike trails through two people's allotments without even talking to them. And they had actually staked out the ground and was ready to go to work. And then through our work, through OCA work and using WRLC, we helped that community take that project right back to the drawing board and get local input. So they had stopped, and the decision came out to not do that, which was the right decision, because both of those projects you just talked about didn't have local stakeholder input from the very beginning. So that's what we do. We're all volunteer, just like OCA. We're all volunteer to help the industry.
Yeah, and I will put in a pitch. Sigrid Johansson and Caitlin Glover, you couldn't be more or better represented in Washington, D.C. than with those two back there. A very impressive team there that leads that national effort. For today, I wanted to kind of center in on some of the things that were happening with BLM and a proposal that BLM has put forward, and comment period has just ended. You want to talk about that conservation piece that they proposed there?
Yep, you bet. So like what we talked about with the mule deer here in Oregon and like the Lemon Gulch, is nationally the BLM on April 3rd came out with a proposed rule to conservation and land health. And what that stated, and it's a big old long rule and there's lots of parts and pieces to it, basically stated that like we have grazing leases on BLM land, they're going to offer conservation leases to third-party entities, to enhance and protect and mitigate or restore land health. So that proposed rule emphasizes ecosystem protection and restoration. Now that proposed rule came out with no stakeholder input, not
Uh,
only grazing, but the energy sector was not involved. They wrote this rule in-house without any outside input from other land use, natural resource organizations whatsoever. So it wasn't just the grazing.
Yeah, and we came to find out that even here in Region 6, the directors here didn't even know about it before it was rolled out.
That's correct. It came straight from Washington, D.C., hit the Federal Register, and it was news to our local directors. Since that time, OCA, Farm Bureau, PLC, NCBA, ASI, which American Sheep Industry, more than 50 other organizations in all Western states have signed on to a letter opposing this new rule. So far, the BLM is just not backing down.
Yeah. I want to talk just a little bit about how we dove into the middle of that. So we happened to be back in Washington, D.C. when this was getting rolled out. We heard from Director Manning in a presentation, but we also got a one-on-one visit with her. And so you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yep. We did have the opportunity to sit down with the director and Errol Rice were the two people that we visited with. And my questions and for them was, how did you come up with this and why? Because as we read the law, there was a 1976 law, Federal Land Management Policy Act, called FLPMA for short, that stated that federal lands must be for multiple use. And the term multiple use or principal use was for domestic livestock grazing, fish and wildlife development, utilization, mineral exploration and use, and timber production, along with grazing, recreation, and wildlife. That is defined as multiple use in a 1976 law, FLPMA. Conservation is not mentioned there at all. Yet they are trying to make conservation a use on par and maybe even above other uses as we delve deeper into this new rule.
Yeah, and even going back further into the 1898 Organic Act, we're a long ways from that and
Yes.
and what's being proposed.
Yep.
So Matt, there's other things on the horizon that we need to keep a keen eye on that are going to have some impacts on grazers and other users on the land. They're talking about siting up to 500,000 acres of solar panels on BLM land. Do you think that will be communicated well with prior to that, or what are your expectations on that?
So there was a large site right outside of Redmond that's on the docket right now, and that kind of came out of the blue. We got calls from permittees saying that they had got notification that they had 2 years there, and then we've jumped into that because, again, the 1976 law was for multiple use, and when you have thousands of acres of solar panels, they'll need to be fenced off or put on like 10-foot poles so cattle and sheep can, and livestock can graze underneath them. I hope that we are a part of that conversation. The biggest conversation is going to be on this conservation rule, and that'll kind of bring all this stuff to a head because it all rolls into it when it comes to energy development along with conservation. So will we be a part of it? I hope so. We haven't been, not just here in the state, but just nationally, we haven't been. These directives have been coming from Washington, D.C. And like you said earlier, even our local guys and gals in the state haven't heard about it until we hear about it.
Yeah, and that was the question I had for Director Manning, going back to the conservation rule, in that these guys they have no objection to doing conservation work. They just want to know that they're going to be able to graze at the same time and continue to do that. And we got a non-answer when
Yep.
I suggested that, and that's never a good thing.
The answer we got, if you remember, was you guys just need to sign on to it. It's really good for you. That's the answer we got. That makes me very worried.
Yeah. And so subsequently after that meeting, we went and met with legislators, and we met with all of our legislators back there in Washington, D.C., including our two senators. And actually, Senator Wyden was fairly wound up about this. He doesn't like being blindsided, hadn't heard about this, was concerned that it wasn't from the bottom up, and really wanted to take some action on it. We haven't seen that action, but I know he's been working on trying to get some further conversation out this direction, and we didn't have engagement this far west where a lot of the BLM is cited here. And so you want to talk about where they positioned some of those meetings?
Sure. Part of this whole process was that they meaning the BLM, Department of Interior, it said that they had stakeholder input, but there was 5 listening sessions. And these 5 sessions, 2 of them were virtual, and the 3 others were in urban areas like Denver, Colorado, and Reno, Nevada. And I don't remember where the third one was, but it wasn't in the heart of where the BLM grazers were. It wasn't in Burns, Oregon, or it wasn't in Ontario, Oregon. It wasn't in Boise, Idaho, or Casper, Wyoming. So that's a red flag, and we couldn't get them to change that. They wouldn't add anything more to it. Those 5 sessions were not question and answer sessions. They were just listening sessions. The BLM talking to anybody who was on there. We also last week through the Public Lands Council got on a Zoom call on the Western states, and I was on there representing Oregon to get more information. But again, there was a lot of questions and not a lot of answers on it. So, when we talked with Senator Wyden, and you said he was wound up, he most certainly was, because he didn't know about it either. And it's under, only Congress can authorize new uses on public land. It can't just come from a department. So he was very surprised of that. And as he told you and I, that he would look into it and delve into it and help us out there. So I'm certainly hope that he does. And I know you have gotten some information back from his office that he's still on top of it.
Yeah. And even recently we visited with him, and he assures me that he's still working on that. Well, Matt, on a bright note, I was watching little snippets of Western Video Market yesterday and seeing some live stream. I saw some yearlings, some 975-pound yearlings sell for close to $2,400 yesterday. And we do have a bright spot here, and wanted to mention that. But if we don't have a place to graze them, it doesn't do us a whole lot of good.
Yeah, that's correct. There's even the BLM's own numbers, and I may have just froze up again on you, but the BLM's own economic numbers say that so grazing contributes 1.439 billion on an annual basis to their bottom line, and 8.5 billion in related services and employment through their agency. So grazing is important, and why they didn't talk to us first about this is really beyond me.
Yeah, I agree. Congressman Walden a few years ago, he said we've become a government of the agency, by the agency, and for the agency, and completely got this thing backwards. And the brazenness with which BLM did this from the top down is absurd. But this is why we have an organization, we have a PLC, and this is why we take these things on, and so we're well positioned to do that. Do you have any closing thoughts here, Matt?
Yeah, I got quite a few closing thoughts. The BLM is also trying to change the definitions and the use of ACECs, which is areas of critical environmental concern. And if they get their way, then that will be the top dog. And if grazing leases don't conform to a conservation lease, or mineral exploration or anything else, but won't conform to the guise of a conservation lease, then they could be precluded. So it could be an avenue for us to lose grazing acres and AUMs, which will really have a substantial negative impact on ranches and local communities that they serve here throughout Oregon and throughout the West. So if this is pushed through, but it will become a land of multiple use to a land of singular use, and that's not good.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Matt, appreciate all the work that you've done there for public lands. It's invaluable, and a state that is 52% federally managed, and on this east side, it's exponentially larger portion than that. And we really appreciate your work, and with that, we'll wrap it up for the day. And again, appreciate you coming in, and have a good day.
You bet. Thank you, Todd.
Yep. Bye.